Imagine that under the waters of a very deep, very cold, and murky lake, there exists a creature unlike any other that exists today, or at least that we know for sure exists. Welcome to Truly Terrified Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and
I'm Joe.
The first widely publicized modern eyewitness account of seeing the Loch Ness Monster, which is affectionately referred to as Nessie, dates back to May 2nd, 1933. It is not the one that you are going to think it is. This happened a year earlier before the famous photograph. This report came from a couple, Mr. and Mrs. John McKay, who claimed to have seen a large creature moving across the road toward Loch Ness. Loch Ness just means Lake Ness or Ness Lake, but I'm using their name.
Yeah.
This account sparked widespread interest in media coverage and led to a surge in Loch Ness Monster sightings and investigations. So that primed for what happened next, because then all the people came out to the lake and they were all saying they saw this creature. It's important to note that stories and legends of a creature in Loch Ness go back much further in Scottish folklore and oral tradition, with sporadic reports and sightings recorded throughout history. So those earlier accounts often describe encounters with mysterious creatures in the lake. They might not specifically match the modern image of what people say the Loch Ness Monster looks like. Most people say it looks like I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but plesiosaur. So like a plesiosaur-like creature with a long neck and humps. That's what most people now say. And those reports from way, 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 way back don't necessarily describe the creature in that same way.
Though people could have, even if something exists in the lake, people's perceptions of it are still being shifted by,
stories
what they think it could be.
Yeah,
Again, even if there is a monster, there's still going to be people's, how they interpret it, what they're seeing is going to be.
Yeah. The earliest written account of the Loch Ness Monster is from, you're not going to believe this, 565 AD.
Wow.
Yeah. It was written in the biography of Saint Columba, who was an Irish missionary and abbot. So this account describes Columba seeing a large beast near Loch Ness, and it was about to attack a swimmer. So Columba raised his hand and commanded the monster, "Go back with all speed in the name of God." And the beast fled, and the swimmer was saved. So you can take that as you will. Obviously, it's been prettied up to fit the narrative of this saint, but the stories of there being something in that water have existed for a long time. One thing you have to understand, it's not a lake like Spring Lake in Wisconsin or Lake Mead in Nevada, or, it's not just a big old lake that you could float around on and look down and see fish swimming around it. It is a large freshwater lake. It's located in the Scottish Highlands. It is about 23 miles long, I think.
So it's pretty long.
It's pretty long, and its name comes from the River Ness, which flows into it. So the River Ness feeds Loch Ness. It's part of a series of interconnected, very murky bodies of water. They're murky because of the peat that's naturally occurring around there, and so it colors the water. So it's kind of like how, you see a pond out in the woods that has a lot of oak trees around it. The water will be very dark. So the water is very dark. You can't see in the water.
So that's why you couldn't just take a submarine down and look.
No, even if you go down, the visibility is practically nil. Okay, so south of Loch Ness, it connects to a segment of the Caledonian Canal, but at its northern end, it empties into the North Sea.
There's a waterway between the lake and the sea. You could, if presumably it's not really flat, really shallow, you could swim from the lake to the sea, and vice versa.
You probably couldn't.
But a giant monster
could. Okay, it's the second largest Scottish lake by surface area. but it has significant depth. At its deepest point, it reaches 755 feet deep. That's
So it's extremely deep
crazy
and murky.
deep, very murky, very cold. You know, we're talking Scotland. It's very northern. It is connected to the sea. You know, there's all of these things that make it mysterious. And it only has one island, and it's an artificial island that somebody created. It's called Cherry Island, and it's at the southwestern end. The southwestern end is the end that's nearest to the waterway, the river Ness that's feeding it. So, you know, that the only island is at the other end. So at that cold end, at that end that's dumping out into the ocean, 755 feet deep, black, you can't see in it. That would...
Sounds like a nightmare.
It sounds like, well, I hate deep water anyway.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you talk about the Loch Ness Monster, it's just kind of a given. Everybody just kind of accepts that there's something there. There's something there. So have you thought about it at all? Have you considered it?
Well, I mean, like most things, I have to believe that it's misinterpretation of. I mean, it's most likely it's a misinterpretation. Either somebody's just flat out lying, like a grifter, someone's buying for tourism or something, or it's a misinterpretation of something like there's floating wood, they took a picture of floating wood, or it's a regular animal, they took a picture of the regular animal. And then, of course, people then are going there and they're primed to see something. And so it exacerbates this situation. If anything, like it could have been a sea animal, big sea animal, you know. There are seals and things that have an elongated neck and flippers.
I do think that some of the people who have seen it probably saw something and they misinterpreted it, but there are definitely a lot of grifters, a lot of people who have...
And that's the other thing. Even if there really is something, there's also going to be people lying about it, and tricking people about it, and people misinterpreting things. Again, even if the monster exists, it's in the lake, there's still going to be people who see a floating piece of wood and think it's the monster.
Right. So one thing that they found with radar was a large structure, and I don't know whether they got it. I think they actually got it out. And it turned out it was a rather large model of the Loch Ness Monster that someone had put in there to try and mess with people.
That's funny.
I mean, it's just mind-boggling. But tourism in that area, I mean, it totally is relying on the legend of Loch Ness Monster, and has for almost 100 years.
Yeah. So there's an
they can benefit,
for people to lie about it.
Yeah.
And again, all of that's true even if the monster exists. I mean, the existence of the monster has nothing to do with sightings now, because you can't, like, even if you knew the monster was in there, you couldn't say whether a sighting of it was a tourist who saw a piece of wood and was just primed to see a monster, or someone is grifting, or it's the actual monster.
Right.
You know?
Right. For a few pounds, you can go get on a boat and someone will take you out and they will tell you the story of Loch Ness Monster. And I'm sure during those things, the people are all really primed to see something.
Exactly.
And there may even be other people who do things like set a thing adrift to try and mess with you. It's probably also often foggy there.
Yep.
You know, there are lots of different things.
And there really could be animals in the water. I mean, fish.
Yes. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. So generally, Nessie is described as being large, very large, long-necked, with humps on its back, generally resembling a plesiosaur, which is, as I said before, an ancient marine reptile.
It's extinct.
And it's went extinct millions of years ago.
Presumably.
Yes, complete. Okay, so it's extinct. All right.
Yeah. I mean, so if we're saying, okay, there could be a monster in the lake, you're looking at what are the chances a dinosaur could have somehow survived or have been breeding till now, or there's some other mysterious monster in the lake.
I found some scientists comments about that very subject, and I'll tell you in just a minute. So you have to remember, sightings of Nessie have been reported for centuries, but people have been squirrely when they get nervous for centuries. If there was going to be a lake to make somebody nervous, it would be Loch Ness.
That lake.
It would be that lake for sure. And the most famous modern accounts have been from the 1930s and have gone on ever since.
So there haven't been like recent accounts.
Yes, it's all the time. People are saying that they saw them.
Saying they saw them.
Saying they saw them.
And there was a picture, a black and white picture from
from 1934. The most famous photo of the Loch Ness Monster is known, and this is the one you're talking about, is known as the surgeon's photograph. It was taken by Robert Wilson, who was a London-based gynecologist, and that was in 1934. And it depicts a long-necked creature with a small head emerging from the water. So think about, that iconic picture of Nessie. Yeah. And actually, I've found not that picture, because that one's blurry, because it was very, very distant, and it was very blurry, and it was 1934 technology. But I found a picture, somebody redid it, and I fiddled around, and so that will be on the YouTube version of this. It will not be on the other podcast versions of this, but the YouTube version of this will have a picture of Nessie. Okay, so that photograph, the surgeon's photograph, gained widespread fame, and it became iconic in the lore of the Loch Ness Monster. And because it appeared to show this creature, it sparked renewed interest and debate about the existence of Nessie. It was only a year before that that couple said they saw a large creature crossing the road and going after somebody. So, that kind of stimulated everybody's imagination. But that photograph has absolutely been debunked.
The old one?
The one that they call the surgeon's photo. They've determined that it was actually a small model of Nessie mounted on a toy submarine, and it was photographed from a deceptive angle to appear much larger and far away. That? Maybe the doctor admitted it. I don't know.
But they're really confident.
It's absolutely, it's been debunked. And because it was so striking and remarkable, and it was a prominent person who you'd think you could trust, it remains one of the most recognizable and influential pieces of evidence in the legend. People will say, well, there's a photograph of it. It's been debunked. It was a fake. It's like those fairy photographs. Those are debunked. There are probably still people who believe that those were photographs in the 1930s or whatever it was of fairies in a garden, and they weren't. They were cutouts. And if you look at them closely, you can see. They were absolutely cutouts. This just proves how powerful imagery can shape public perception and belief, even in the absolute absence, the complete nothingness of proof, and people will still believe it. So here we get into the scientific stuff. Belief in the existence of the Loch Ness Monster persists despite any conclusive evidence. I will say conclusive evidence because there is a little bit of evidence. So here are some of the arguments that proponents say this shows that it's possible that Loch Ness Monster could exist. Eyewitness accounts. They say many people have seen something unusual in Loch Ness over the years. Obviously, they have. I mean, it's for centuries. And those sightings usually describe a large humped creature with a long neck resembling the popular image of Nessie. So, eyewitness accounts. Lots of people have seen it. Historical and cultural references, because there have been stories and legends of a monster inhabiting Loch Ness dating for centuries. They say that there's got to be something to it. There's a long-standing cultural belief in its existence, so there has to be something to it. There's a long-standing cultural belief in lots of weird shit, like Santa Claus.
One thing, if everyone who, every origin of a story about the Loch Ness Monster, if the person who the story originated with knew about the cultural version of the monster, then they were influenced by it. And it very well could have been a very, very long time ago, someone made a story up, or they thought they saw something or whatever, and then it just perpetuated. The next person was influenced by that person, so that's what they saw. That's what story they created. And so on and so on and so on. It's one of those things, like, you really need to in the best case scenario, you need to find witnesses who are not influencing one another. If you can do that, then you're pretty sure, like, what are the chances that two people who do not know each other, have never heard each other, don't know each other's stories, produce the same story? That's good evidence for some. It'd be like this. Imagine 2 monster stories originate in 2 places around the world. And it's really unlikely that any given place is one of those 2 places, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's this town versus that town. It's 2 places across the entire planet. Now imagine if those 2 places just happen to be the same place. It's really, really, really unlikely that two independent stories of similar stories come from the same place unless they're influencing one another.
Okay, so as you're talking, this is just something that came to my mind. I don't even know if this is possible. So in 500 AD or whatever it was, whatever that first,
something like that
first story, is it possible? I mean, there were ships back then, right? Mm-hmm. Is it possible that some ship traveled someplace, and because they used to grab animals. I mean, that's how, they grabbed monkeys and gave them to monarchs as gifts and, weird stuff like that. Could somebody have grabbed an alligator?
Yeah, that's more likely than a dinosaur lived to this point.
Right.
That's more likely than there being an undetermined monster.
Right. So what I'm saying is the origin story, which is this saint standing on the Columbus, standing on the banks, it was actually an alligator, which did not survive because it's too cold and there's not the right food for it in that area. But he saw this and, frightened it away from the swimmer. And so then now we have an origin story. Mm-hmm. And then people's imagination, because that would be terrifying. If you did not know about alligators, that would be really terrifying.
And that was before people. So there are alligators in
warmer climates,
Africa, in Asia, I want to say. There are none in Europe naturally, right?
I don't believe so.
There was ship travel and obviously trade from the places
in the Americas,
again, a seal could just swim into the lake.
That is true. And who knows, who knows. So the historical and cultural references is one of the arguments. Another one is photographic and video evidence. Most of it has been debunked, but some of it still, they don't really know what it's a picture of. Sonar and radar anomalies. The one case, they did discover that it was a model of Loch Ness, but there are some other large unidentified objects in the water that, because of its depth and its darkness, I don't know.
Presumably the monster is going to move.
Presumably. And then biological plausibility. So proponents argue that Loch Ness is deep and extensive enough to potentially support a large, undiscovered creature. They point to other instances where previously unknown species have been discovered in remote or deep environments, which is true. That is true. Mm-hmm. And continued interest in research, despite skepticism from many scientists and researchers, there's still ongoing interest in it, and it prompts occasional scientific investigations and explorations. So, the most recent one is, in 2018, geneticist Neil Gemmell, I think I'm pronouncing it right, and a team, so he had a whole team of people. They went to Loch Ness in Scotland and sampled the lake's environmental DNA to catalog what all lives in its murky depths. Because as creatures, fish and whatever swim around in there, they're shedding scales. Mm-hmm. When they die, they decay. Their DNA is in that water. So they collected the water to catalog the DNA from what is living in that water. They found evidence of 3,000 species in the water, but none of them were giant reptiles, dinosaurs, or any other animal that could possibly match up with the popular image of the mythical sea monster Nessie. They did offer an alternate theory. They found large amounts, like tremendous amounts, unimaginable amounts of eel DNA in Loch Ness. Gemmell said, quote, the sheer volume of it was a bit of surprise. He noted that the study couldn't determine or didn't determine the size of the eels that the DNA came from, but the amount of it was remarkable.
Don't eels produce like a mucous membrane over their body? Makes sense they'd be producing lots of...
Yeah, but you would think that a geneticist who's doing this experiment would understand the specifics of eel DNA. And
so, presumably they're very deep in the lake.
They must be. But if they're very large... Okay, so...
And eels do get large.
Do you remember...
Can get large, I should say.
Do you remember the TV show with Donnie? Don Wildman.
Yeah.
And there was something that washed ashore. I think it was on his show.
Yeah, I remember.
And everybody was like, oh my God, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was an animal that's usually seen in very deep water.
Yeah.
But it had somehow
And
managed
it's like
to...
an eel. Or
it was very much like... It might have been an eel, I don't remember. But it was very strange looking. So it's possible that a creature like an eel, which when it surfaced would have those characteristic humps as it surfaced, its head would appear small because it's only a freaking eel. And as we've seen in so many other cases where people believe that they've been primed, so people have been primed to believe that there's a wild monkey, man-sized monkey out in the woods, out in the jungle. And then they see a regular-sized monkey and they inflate it in their mind to being gigantic, man-sized, and it's not. It's absolutely not. Couldn't that just be the case?
Yeah.
That it's...
Imagine you're at the lake and you see a ribbon of flesh worming its way through the water. What are you going to think? You're not going to think, oh, it's probably this eel. You're going to think, whoa, look. You try to get your phone and take a picture. And look. It's
especially if
Loch Ness Monster.
Especially if I was at Loch Ness and everybody was talking about the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it was Josh Gates' show, but I can't remember which series of his it was, that they were at a lake and they were looking for something in the water. And to me, it just clearly looked like ripples of light catching the waves. But they claimed they could see something underneath the water. And one of the things, one of the biologists maybe that he talked to after the fact said, is that sometimes fish will move together and it appears that it's larger than it is. So perhaps eels, snakes do this. They ball up in big globby messes. Maybe eels do that.
Maybe it could have been multiple eels.
Yeah, so I don't know. But I think that probably that's more likely than a dinosaur survived to this day.
Though presumably if there was, you just have to ask, what would it take for that to be the case? A dinosaur would have to have an environment where people aren't seeing it.
Yes.
Where you cannot reliably just go to that spot and find one of them.
Yep.
A large enough population to keep breeding under pressure from predators, and they'd have to have something to eat.
Yep.
There's a long list of things that you have to go through, and they have to be that way for millions of years.
Yes.
So
it's theoretically possible for a creature like the Loch Ness Monster to elude detection, but it's very improbable given our understanding of biology, ecology, and the environment of Loch Ness itself. So ecological feasibility, which is what you just pointed out, that body of water has been extensively studied over the years. The ecosystem would need to support a breeding population, and it would require sufficient food service sources and a viable habitat. And they have no evidence of any of that. Our technological advances, like underwater cameras and satellite imagery, would make it difficult for an animal to remain undetected. Now, the problem with the underwater cameras is that it's so dark. But we do have sonar. We have and satellite imagery, which you would be able to see if something comes to the surface, and it would need to come to the surface because they're saying it is an air-breathing creature.
Yeah. Especially if it was on land to chase somebody.
Yes.
So here's another idea. The ocean, it's connected to the ocean.
Yes.
Imagine this. It doesn't have to be a dinosaur or whatever, but a creature that does not come to the surface.
So it's purely aquatic.
Purely aquatic. It's not deep ocean. It's not in coastal regions, so it's off the coast. And it's very sensitive to noise, so it will evade whenever it hears a person or a boat or a submarine or whatever. We would not know about that creature's existence.
That's true.
Unless it died and its body washed up, or it went somewhere, that then we would see it.
Right.
Maybe it does occasionally go to the surface.
So let's just play with that idea for a second. Okay, so if some creature lived in the ocean, and we know there are creatures in the ocean that we do not know of yet. We haven't discovered them. It's absolutely scientifically known that there are unknown creatures living in the ocean.
And there's the ocean is so huge.
Yes.
There are probably pretty different creatures.
Yes.
Exotic creatures that we
absolutely
probably will never see.
Okay, so let's imagine that there is a creature living in the ocean, in the North Sea, and it occasionally, for whatever reason, comes into, now it has to go upstream, but it's quite large. It comes into Loch Ness, maybe out of curiosity. We know that whales sometimes come into inlets and they're found in a river inland, and it's like, what the fuck? You better turn around, buddy. You're going to die. So why not? Why? That's possible. And that's why the sightings are sporadic, and most of the sightings are BS, because they're people either A, primed, or B, grifters who are trying to make a buck off of it, or just get their moment of popularity or, notoriety.
Yeah. So it's like conceivably possible, but if you look at what it would take, it's just much more likely to be something like an eel, or misinterpretations.
Yeah.
Aliens.
It's
aliens.
Oh, okay. So let's think about that for a second. If I know that you're smiling because you think, that's so stupid, but okay. So let's say aliens occasionally come to Earth and they take their craft down deep into the water, and they come out to observe their environment that they've landed in, and it's hostile. So they go back in their spaceship and fly away.
Yeah, so you could say the Loch Ness Monster is one of the aliens, or maybe the aliens have existed for millions of years and they have a dinosaur and they let it loose. But it's a good example of when you start adding new assumptions, it just decreases the chance you're right. Regardless what they are.
Yeah.
Every time you add a new assumption, it makes it less likely you're right. Sometimes the assumptions line up. They're essentially the same thing, and so they haven't decreased the chances, but, it's aliens. Okay, that requires aliens, and they've existed for millions of years. That requires them to have existed for millions of years. And they took a dinosaur. It requires them to have preserved or have bred dinosaurs that long. And they released it. Why would they release it? It requires them to have released it.
Okay, I have to say, it comes back to why.
Yeah.
Why? Because there has to be a reason why. People, aliens, creatures just don't do things for no good reason.
Yeah.
We may not understand their reason, but they have a reason. It is fascinating to entertain the idea of unknown creatures lurking in remote or deep waters, and we know that there are unknown creatures. So this is just like, could this be an unknown creature? Is it possible? And that's fun to think about. But at this point in time, the Loch Ness Monster remains a cultural and folkloric phenomenon rather than a scientifically supported entity. Without any concrete physical evidence, the existence of Nessie is pretty much highly improbable according to current mainstream scientific understanding. Truly Terrified is a Salt of the Earth production. Tell us your story and send us your comments. You can send us a 3-minute voicemail at 715-575-9420 or text us at that same number. Email us at lynnandjoeonthego@gmail.com. That contact information is also in the show notes or the description below. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.
You can't outswim Nessie.